Good afternoon. This is Erica with Four Directions Native Vote, and we're here with Georgia House candidate Bob Christian for District 6. Bob, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you do what you do.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here today. As I told you in the beginning here, I was truly excited when this came up on my calendar. It's something that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. The name is Bob Christian, and I'm actually running for the United States House of Representatives, Congressional District 6 here in Georgia. I'm on the Democratic ticket, and I have been just humbled by everything that has happened to me to be the nominee on the Democratic ticket. For those listening, for those that may not know what's going on in the district, it is now a brand new district. They changed it when they redrew the maps this time around, and it includes all of Dawson County, all of Forsyth County, the eastern third of Cherokee County, the eastern portion of Cobb County, with tiny pieces of Marietta in there, and then North Fulton County to include Alpharetta, Milton, Sandy Springs, and Roswell, and then a tiny little piece of Gwinnett right around the Sugar Hill area. And the reasons why I jumped into this race was the tail end of it, the straw that broke the camel's back was that redistricting, because they took what was a 1-point Democratic district and turned it into a 24-point Republican district. And they did that in the face of a group of people that for 2 cycles in a row had elected Democratic leaders. These are the folks that determined to send Lucy McBath to the Congress, that determined to send Carolyn Bordeaux to the Congress. They made the difference in sending both Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff to the Senate. And they had elected Democratic leaders up and down their ballot. And they were redistricted out of that vote and then had their voice so diluted that it was going to be fairly impossible, or so those in power thought, to get a Democratic representation back into place. And that's not how democracy works. The politicians do not get to pick their voters. That is not how this works. It is supposed to be voters that pick their politician. For me, you tack that on to the fact that they stormed the Capitol on January 6th. I took that very personally. I'm an old combat veteran. I swore an oath to the country when I was a very young man, and that attack defined the words "and domestic," which are part of the oath. Defend the enemies and against foreign and domestic enemies, to defend the Constitution against both. And you put all these things together, you put all this argument, vitriol, rhetoric that has come into play over the last few years, and it's very much, all of a sudden, that's not how democracy works. And so for me, it's a very personal fight about saving our democracy. All the issues that are on the ballot come secondary to that, because if we don't ensure the fact that we are able to elect our representatives the way we want to be represented, well, then the rest of it's not going to come to play. And that's why I do what I do, and that's who I am to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here today, Bob. And we do have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
So let's start over here with Sandra Mitrovic from the National Congress of American Indians. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you spending your time with us today. I'm going to jump right in and give a little bit of summary and then my question. ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, was enacted in 1978 in response to a crisis affecting American Indian and Alaska Native children, families, and tribes. Studies revealed that large numbers of Native children were being separated from their parents, extended families, and communities by state child welfare and private adoption agencies. In fact, researchers found that 25 to 35% of all Native children were being removed. Of these, 85% were placed outside of families and communities, even when fit and willing relatives were available. At the time, not only was ICWA vitally needed, but it was crafted to address some of the most long-standing and egregious removal practices, specifically targeting Native children. Among its added protections for Native children, ICWA requires caseworkers to make several considerations when handling the ICWA case, including providing active efforts to the family, identifying a placement that fits under the ICWA preference provisions, notifying the child's tribe and the child's parents of the child custody proceeding, and working actively to involve the child's tribe and the child's parents in the proceedings. Because these added protections address not only specific systems abuses directed at Native children, but also their unique political status and cultural considerations, ICWA has been labeled the gold standard of child welfare policy by experts and national leading child advocacy organizations far beyond Indian country. My question is, right now there is a case pending before the Supreme Court that will challenge the Indian Child Welfare Act. Should the unthinkable happen and ICWA is found to be invalid, it would have far-reaching consequences that will be felt for generations, namely weakening protections for Native children, thus clearing the way for bad actors to grow their control of Native land, Native industry, and Native futures. would you consider introducing or co-sponsoring legislation to correct what would be a grave error by the court?
Thank you, Sandra. And again, thank you for having me. In the course of my research into this question, in the course of looking into ICWA, I kept asking myself, would it be conceivable or even possible for me to ask a foreign nation to change their laws for me? And obviously that on the face of it is a ludicrous proposition. I mean, when I go to France or when I go to Japan, I expect to be arrested or treated or prosecuted under their laws, their authority. And that makes sense to us when we do that. And so I really began to feel that this was much more an attack on sovereignty. And then, of course, that delves into the McGirt decision, and that delves into what's been going on in Oklahoma with the boundary fights. And the ultimate answer is that I don't believe the Supreme Court will overturn ICWA. Although we cannot tell what this court will do all of a sudden with its new makeup and its new change. But at the end of that, if they should, then by all means I would put that into place. Because as you said, it is a gold standard for how children should be treated when they find themselves in that situation, whether they're Native children, whether they're non-Native children, because the first place you want to put a child is with somebody who understands their background, their culture, their needs, their beliefs, and you would like those people to also look similar to that child, and you would especially want those people that you place the child with to be members of their family. And so I don't understand. I honestly, as I read through all of the different things and all the different briefings and sub-briefings, I just didn't quite get the argument as to why this was on the table as something that needed to even be overturned. I do believe the Congress was well within their power to create a law and pass that law. As last I checked, that's exactly what the Congress is supposed to do. It's been precedent law since 1978. And it has not had any failings or problems, and in fact has made the lives of everybody affected better through that process. It probably is one of the best examples of legislative policy that we can put out right now, especially in our divided times, and say this works. And it works like it was intended to work, and it works like it's supposed to work. And so if they should overturn it, which again, like I said, I don't think that they will, but if they do, then by all means I would be willing to sponsor or co-sponsor. But obviously we're not going to be aware of that until June, July, so it would be a long term around to the next session. Because if I remember correctly, it's November 9th that they're planning to hear that. So, well, if all goes well, I'll be at a bit of a party on November 9th, and so I'll pay attention to what's going on. But but once that decision comes down and we see the impact of it, then anything that needs to be corrected, or if it needs to even be put back into place, then I would be on board with that, almost immediately on board with that.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Principal Chief of the Lower Muskogee Creek Nation, Bonnie McCormick, for her question.
Okay, my question is on Help America Vote Act. The Help American Vote Act of 2002 was passed by the United States Congress to make sweeping reforms to the nation's voting process. HAVA addresses improvements to voting systems and voter access, but were definitely following the 2000 election. One of the provisions within the Help American Vote Act allows for the use of the funds to be used to improve voter engagement. In the state of South Dakota, the Help American Vote Act is used to help counties pay for early in-person satellite offices and can be used to for drop boxes. If elected, would you support the funding of the Help American Vote Act?
Pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for having me here today. And that is a wonderful question, especially in the times that we're dealing with right now, because as we all know, the voting rights are under contention here, specifically in the state of Georgia, but they're under attack all the way across the country. And again, when I was looking through and doing the research for this day, it occurred to me that when you look at what's going on today and you look at what happened in 2000, we're actually kind of doing the same thing that we did 20 years ago. We looked at our election, we realized that there were some problems in the election that we needed to fix, and as a result they passed HAVA and said, let's get that taken care of. And all the things we're working with now were a result of HAVA being in place. We did it the way it was supposed to be done. We did it through legislation, we did it through conversation, we did it through process. And we said, okay, here's the way you fix those things, here's where we put them in place. And the only thing that I can think of why anybody would want to take away the right to vote is because they know that if everybody votes, they'd lose. And that's the only reason I can see anybody arguing against taking away one of the things that is fundamentally an American right. The right to vote, the right to choose my own destiny, the right to be my own person is the fundamental American right that we carry with us everywhere that we go. It's actually just a fundamental human right to be in charge of your own personage and your own body. And we have encapsulated that in the right to vote here in this country. I would not only support fully funding HAVA, I would be, the moment I get to Congress, I am already on record to fully support the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, because we have to protect our right to vote. As I said in my intro, it is our democracy that is at stake, and the fundamental key to maintaining a good democracy is the right to vote and an individual's right to do so unfettered, as easily as possible, with the only clarification being that you have to be an American citizen. End of story. After that, being able to vote should be as easy as being able to breathe.
Thank you for that answer.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. And I have one more question for you, Bob. My question, thank you also for your support for Native youth, for Native voting rights, and now I have a question regarding Native women, specifically missing and murdered Indigenous women. MMIW is kind of the name for this movement now. Okay. The Violence Against Women Act, enacted in 1994, created and supported comprehensive, cost-effective response to domestic violence and stalking, administered by the U.S. Department of Justice and Health and Human Services. It's dramatically improved federal, state, and local response to missing and murdered Indigenous women. But in 2022, the Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized with a package signed by President Biden in March. And this bipartisan reauthorization included groundbreaking provisions to strengthen and modernize the law. The law provides survivors, the thousands of local programs that serve them, and communities with much needed resources and alternatives to criminal responses and prevention programming. It also included new economic justice provisions and bolsters access for survivors of all genders by strengthening non-discrimination laws and creating an LGBTQ services program. The law also restores tribal jurisdiction, allowing tribes to hold non-native perpetrators accountable, and improves existing housing protections and increases access to emergency and short-term housing, and creates dedicated investments in culturally specific service providers to ensure survivors of color are supported. The economic impacts of COVID-19 have greatly impacted survivors and only exacerbating the existing inequalities in our society. Additional funding and resources are needed as Congress considers funding levels in its fiscal year of 2023 appropriations legislation. So my question to you is, do you believe that these life-saving services should be prioritized and federal funding used to address and prevent domestic violence?
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to start this. I'm going to tell a personal story to start the answer to this question. Years ago, when I first got out of the service, I had a sales job, and it was traveling around I was in Colorado at the time. I was traveling around the state, and I decided one day I didn't want to travel around the state, so I took a day off to hang out with the family. And I was sitting out on the porch watching the kids out playing in the cul-de-sac that we lived in, and there was a big group of neighborhood kids, and I heard a gunshot, which I was very familiar with from my time in the service, and it was right there in the neighborhood. I recognized it immediately. And I got up and I went and told the kids, get in the house, let's everybody get in the house, find out what's going on. And as I'm getting into the house, I hear another one. And I think, okay, something's gone down on the street, and I go out to see if I can see what's going on. And about 3 houses down, there's this young woman, obviously terrified, cowering behind a pickup truck in her driveway. And I make my way down there, and I convince her to come back to the house while we call the police, and that we're going to wait for the police at my house where she can be safe. A few minutes later, shortly later, the person who was firing the gun came wandering down and demanded access to my house because he had figured out that she was in there. Apparently he had seen me take her down. And he accused me of several vile things that he figured out was going on in there, and so on and so forth. But we wound up getting into a pretty good battle there in my driveway because I wasn't going to let him into the house, obviously. And at the end of it, we were both pretty bloodied, we were both pretty bruised, and my wife was the hero of the incident. She came rolling out and got a good couple of licks in on the guy with a baton she had kept for personal safety for years and years and years. And that kind of drove him off of us. But at that point, he revealed that he had been carrying that pistol with him and had been carrying it the whole time. He backed us away with the weapon. He hit my wife with it. He pistol whipped my wife with it, and then he left. Thankfully, he just left. I don't know what diffused him after that, but he just left. And to make that, because the story goes on forever, and to shorten it down, they eventually, after a standoff with the police, they arrested him, they took him away, and a few weeks later, they released him on parole. He was a first-time criminal, and so they gave him some credit for being a good guy, and they released him on that. And the lady who I had rescued, I thought I had rescued from the back of that situation, she went and picked him up because she had nowhere else to go. She had nowhere else to go. And I think about that a lot. And I especially was thinking about that when I was reading about this question, because to have nowhere to go and to be forced back into that kind of situation, knowing that your life is at risk from that point forward, no one should be put in that situation. And so I would fully support passage of anything that protects violence against women, that prevents it, that supports the victims of it, that can change their pathway and give them somewhere to go. Because, I mean, I don't know what eventually became of them, and I think about them on occasion, but I know that it could not have been a good ending. I don't think there could have been a good ending to that situation, but she had nowhere else to go. And so the answer to your question is yes. I would fully support the Violence Against Women Act and ensure that it is properly funded and do everything I can to extend those protections while I'm there in Capitol Hill.
Thank you so much for your response,
You're
Bob.
welcome.
Well, let's go ahead and jump to your conclusion and why Indian country should maybe listen to what you have to say and vote for you here in the state of Georgia.
It's, well, thank you, and thank you so much, ladies. That was wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate all of those questions. It's a good reminder of the very different things that you get involved in when you get into a national race. Like I said, what drove me into the race were the changes that had happened, the problems that are underlying our democracy, and then that's not enough. You have to be able to work policy. You have to be able to do things, create things, put things in place. Specifically in my neck of the woods, we're lacking the infrastructure we need to move forward into the next century. It's a very rural area that's becoming a bit urbanized, and they don't have the proper broadband systems in place. They don't even have the proper road networks in place, and so I'm wanting to bring federal dollars down in to make sure the infrastructure of the district is brought up to what it needs to be to move us into the 21st century. And that includes emphasizing the green energy sector. That includes emphasizing those priorities that will, I mean, we just had a huge water project go into place up there. It was right there on Lake Lanier. And the goal is, of course, to preserve that for future generations. It's unfettered growth will wipe out the reason that people move up there. It will just take apart the, I mean, we've got Amicalola Falls, we've got this beautiful backwoods area up there, and so if we just let people grow into it without controlling that, then we'll lose that, and we'll lose that for now and for the future. And so I want to very much preserve our green environment, our economy, and I want to help it grow in a way that sustains people and brings them forward. And I believe there are several pilot programs in our district that can be taken to a national scale that we can then begin to use across the country and say it works here in Georgia. And so we can make this work across the country. And that way we can, well, if all works out, we can start from home and build out bigger, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Do good as near as possible, and then that good expands. It's like ripples in a pond. It just keeps on moving outwards. And we just got to throw a big enough rock, and I'm hoping to be that rock.
Absolutely. Well, we wish you great luck in getting into Congress, and thank you for supporting Native youth, Native women, and Native voting rights and Native voters out there listening to you. We appreciate you so much for being here to support Indian country and being part of our forum.
Oh, I loved it. It's, like I said, I've been looking forward to this all week, and I was not let down at all. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you, Sandra.